Hey everyone, we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining us for our second module, Institutional and STEM Classroom Context. So here we have our guest presenter, Dr. Paloma Vargas, who is a facilitator at Escala and is also the Dean of Mathematics, Science, Health Education, Kinesiology, and Athletics at Oxnard College, a public Hispanics serving institution. With extensive experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion, she focuses on dismantling policies that disadvantage Black, Latinx, and Native American/Indigenous students in higher education. She has served as a facilitator and trainer for faculty at Hispanic serving institutions in centering equity with a particular focus on inclusivity in STEM. Um, Dr. Vargas is an active member of the Aspiring Radical Leaders Institute, the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos, Latinos, and Native Americans in Science, and serves as president of the Alliance of Hispanic Serving Institute Educators. So I'll pass it on to them to get started.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I really appreciate it. So welcome everybody. Um, just a little emoji here. If you can send a little reaction. Are you awake? Somewhat. Okay, Thomas says yes. Donald is awake. So is Adele. Okay. Dr. Jackson, Aisha's, Blanca's ready. Carrie. Michael's still sleeping. It's okay. All right, awesome. Welcome everybody. So just a little thing to wake you all up. I understand it's 9:30 in the morning in June, so totally get it. Thank you all for having me. We're gonna dive into some really, I think, thought-filling sort of material that hopefully will get you all thinking about how you're serving students, how you're looking at your student data, and how you're um, just really engaging with not only the group that you're in now, HSI Resource Hub, um, folks at UNLV, just kind of in general, like how you're relating to everybody. So while we're getting this started, if you have data, I think some of you were looking for some data. Some of you might have gotten some data from your areas. We'll take a second here for you to grab that data. If you don't have data, no stress. It's all good. So I'll give you about a minute to do that, and then we'll move forward, and I'll give you a little bit of information about myself. All right. So hopefully you have your data. If you can't find it, do not stress about it. It is okay. Okay. So we're going to talk about STEM culture and equitable outcomes today. So I'm Dr. Paloma Vargas. Um, my pronouns are she, they. I prefer they, but that's okay. And Dr. Melissa Salazar, who is the CEO and founder of Escala Education, is somebody that I work really closely with. I put her name on here because a lot of the work that we do together. And she is very supportive of us kind of controlling our narrative together and sharing the space. So want to give her a few shout outs here just because she's awesome. Definitely check out Escala Education if you haven't already. I think your facilitators, Blanca and Aisha and Melissa, all are very well aware and familiar with Escala. So definitely talk to them about the work that Escala does. And we'll keep moving forward here. So a little bit of information for today is that we're going to ask you to be self-reflective, right? So listening, silent processing, writing down questions. I'm a very like, my brain works a million miles an hour. So I get questions kind of popping in all the time. It's not always appropriate for me to just like jump out with the question. So if you have a sticky note, a little pad, if you have a burning question that might take us in a separate direction, write it down and we'll get back to you. Social emotional awareness, right? So we want to make sure that we all understand that learning is not linear, right? So sometimes we move forward, sometimes we move backwards, sometimes we move to the side. We want to focus on the group here versus your individual needs. And we want you to be curious about your feelings. Sometimes when we talk about culture, when we talk about these big topics, feelings come up. It is okay to have feelings. Make sure you embrace your feelings. Write down what those feelings are. Uh, don't put your feelings on others. You know, good therapy. And then talking in turn, right? Wait for an invitation to speak or chat, whether we're in a large session, and be mindful of your participation in breakout. We're going to have breakouts today. Make sure you participate. We want to hear from you as well. And we're going to ask you to listen actively, and we'll have some parameters around the breakouts for you all to take a look at. So goals for today, so we're going to review how research supports that STEM culture disproportionately impacts Latinx student success and why systemic culture change is needed to increase persistence and success for Latinx students in STEM. And this can be kind of broadened to um, minoritized students or marginalized students as well, right? We also want to recognize how disaggregated data and questioning of that data help us identify those equity gaps starting at the institutional level and down to the course or instructor level. Little bit about myself. Thank you, Melissa, for the intro. And there's a purpose for this, so hang in there, right? So I serve as the Dean of Math and Science and Mathematics at a 2-year Hispanic serving institution in California. Thankfully, they moved athletics out like a year ago, but I think I'm getting it back in the fall, so who knows? I was faculty in biology at both 2 and 4-year institutions. I served as an HSI director. I was a curriculum developer and facilitator for Escala. I'm a medical and molecular parasitologist, not parapsychologist, different thing. Parasitologist, if it kills you, I like it. And then I was a CC transfer student. I grew up in El Paso, Texas, and attended the University of Texas El Paso for undergrad, and then went off to the East Coast and the Midwest for my PhD and my postdoc. So a little bit about myself. Um, what I want to talk to you about today is my STEM journey, um, and really looking at how that impacts who I am and where I've been and how that is brought into the classroom. And I'm going to ask you all to do the same. So our first breakout is coming up. So get ready. Um, what I have here is a little sketch of what I think my STEM journey looks like. I grew up in El Paso, Texas, as I mentioned before, and I really always felt like I was binational. I was between borders. I started off as at a community college. I had absolutely no idea why or what I was going to do. I thought I wanted to be a medical doctor. My father had gone to medical school for a couple of years in Mexico before my parents immigrated to the US. And I decided to pursue biology. But like many of our students, I had absolutely no idea how to apply for college. I just had no idea what to do. I missed all the deadlines. I was really good with my SATs, my grades were good. I didn't know how to apply for scholarships. I didn't know how to apply for financial aid. By the time I applied for financial aid, I like it was just a mess, right? So I didn't really know what was going on. So I started off at El Paso Community College, and that was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. Best move I've ever made in my life. And it was totally unintentional. But I had a faculty member who took great interest in students that were doing um, well and medium and poorly in his class. It was basically anybody he thought had promise or had some sort of yearning to do different things. And I participated in a research program called Bridges to the Baccalaureate, which is no longer available through the NIH, but it was a program that ran for like 30 years. And it was fantastic. I was able to transfer to the University of Texas, El Paso. I was able to do research on monarch butterflies. How did I get from monarch butterflies to parasites? It's another long story, but I was able through that experience to then apply for other internships. I interned at NYU and at UPenn, and that really gave me a foot in the door to go to grad school. So I actually ended up going to grad school at NYU. and completing my doctoral degree in parasitology, kind of under the umbrella of microbiology. And I really loved it. I thought it was like the coolest thing. And I still think parasites are kind of the coolest thing out there. And what I realized in that time was that there were very few people that looked like me. It was very, very isolating at times. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to talk to. I had a great dean who was a fantastic mentor and a friend and a partner in crime, um, to really start looking at, how do we get more folks that look like me into these spaces. Um, and when I finished grad school, I decided to go back to actually teach high school and to part-time at the community college that I graduated from and the high school that I graduated from. You would think El Paso has like three high schools. No, they have like 50. So I don't know how I ended back at the same high school, but it was amazing. I saw all my teachers, all the people that, were a little confused about how this kid who didn't even apply to college ended up getting a PhD in the sciences. Um, I think it changed their perspective on how they saw their students after that. Because I was definitely not the student that they thought I was, that was going to go to grad school and get a PhD. Um, Went back and did a postdoc at Northwestern. And the postdoc that I did was a teaching and research postdoc. So I would do research during the day and teach in the evenings or vice versa. So it was like Batman, right? So I was Batman during the day, being a researcher, and then I was like Bruce Wayne in the evenings, going and teaching. And I taught at an HSI, so that's how I got into HSI work. And since then, I've been faculty. I was faculty, had my own research laboratory, had students. I'm very proud to say that I think all of my students within the next year will be graduating grad school, med school, or their professional degree that they chose. But oftentimes, I'm the only Latinx, STEM, queer person in the room. So it makes it very interesting to share this kind of story, right? And this is a story that's similar to this is my story, right? But you've probably heard a story similar, or your story might be the same. So what I'm going to ask you to do next is actually to take 5 minutes of, we're going to do a breakout, but first we're going to do 5 minutes of silent reflection. From what I understand, we're going to put you in with your disciplines for your breakout. So first thing that you're going to do is I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes so that you can think about your own STEM journey and maybe highlight some of the challenges that you faced. All right. Once those 5 minutes are up, we're going to send you out into your breakout room and we're going to ask you to share 2 minutes per person. We're going to set a timer for you to do that. You're going to share out in alpha order by last name, and you're going to listen actively. We're going to ask you to not speak or and not react when somebody else is sharing. So you're just listening, right? One of the things that I've learned not to do as I've become a facilitator is one of the ways that I relate to people is to say, oh, that happened to me too. But then you cut into somebody else's story, right? So we're going to take about 5 minutes. Think about your own STEM journey. How did you start? How did science interest you? And how did you get to where you're at now? You don't have to draw a fancy picture. You can just write it out if you want. You can draw a picture if that's what makes you happy. Um, so let's put on a timer for 5 minutes. I'll put one on my phone here. And let's get you started on talking about your own STEM journey. All right. 5 minutes. Okay, Melissa, can you get those breakouts going, please? All right, and we'll leave this up and I'll share this also as a message of what you need to do. So whoever lives closest to campus is going to be the timekeeper. All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope that was a productive breakout for you all. We're going to do a little bit of a share out. So I'm going to call on a couple people. So call first on Jan. How did you experience that breakout? How was that for you? You don't have to tell us what anybody said, just how did that feel?
It's very good, and the three of us come from different nations, like all over the world. So we share our experience, and it's quite different.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. What about is it Hans? Haynes?
Yes, it's Hannes,
Hans.
but no worries, it's a foreign name. So yeah, I feel always almost a little bit embarrassed because I feel like I'm quite privileged, so I didn't face that big challenges so that others have faced. So and I think it's good for me to always be aware of that.
Great. Thank you for sharing. We're gonna go with let's see, Julie, because you're right in the middle of my screen.
Yeah, it was actually really interesting to hear the journeys of the others in my group. And I think we've found actually, I think we all kind of ended with finding a kind of common ground, sort of a similar kind of very different experiences, but a kind of common ground between all of them.
Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing. So what you probably saw there was that everybody has their own experiences. As Julie mentioned, you can find commonality in some of what these experiences are like. And probably what you came away with is that each of these journeys are influenced by where you're from, how you grew up, right? So we heard some folks saying, I feel like I have a lot of privilege. I came from a different country. Um, we had similar paths, right? And so when we think about this, all of our journeys are then influenced by the culture that surrounds us or the culture that is ingrained in us. And just a very, very, very brief primer on culture, right, is that there are many different intersectional identities or different things that influence your culture. I'll give you a quick example. I am Mexican American, Latinx, Latina, and if we have a party at my house, we say it's at 3 p.m. Sometimes people show up at 1. Sometimes people show up at 6. Right? And there's no end time. Like people just stay until they stay. I moved to New York City and I got an invitation somewhere and it was 5 to 9. And I was like, well, what happens at 9? Like, do I have to like pack up my stuff? Do I have to leave? Right? But for me, that was a different concept of time. I had no idea that people were gonna be like, okay, at 9, everybody's gotta go home, right? So I'm, it's 8:59 and I'm still like having a good time and everybody's leaving. And I'm like, what is going on? Because that wasn't the culture that I was brought up in, right? So this concept of time for me was different. Socioeconomic status, gender roles and identities, family kinship, who's, the hierarchy there. For me, it's a very matriarchal society, right? So for me, if my grandma said something, I was gonna do it. I don't care if I was late for class. I don't care if like the professor was going to be mad at me. If my grandma was talking to me, I was staying with my grandma. Like, because otherwise the chancla would come out and it was not going to be a good day. Um, just how our cultural journey influences how we are as individuals, it also influences our classroom, right? And some societies are very high context and some societies are lower context. And one is not better than the other. It's just different, right? So when, we have students that are in a high context culture, for example, our Latinx students, our Black students, our Asian American students, right? Where, you understand or you communicate in a certain way, it may interact differently with how a more Eurocentric culture, a lower context culture might react, right? So that's going to impact who we are within the classroom. Certainly, for me, for example, when I think about the way that I've learned science from my family, from my friends, from my grandmother, who was very much an agricultural, prodigy, in my opinion. Like, she could make anything grow anywhere, but she always tied it to something else, right? We tied it to a different part of our culture. There was a reason why we were farming those things. It wasn't just, oh, I'm going to make it because it's cool and it's nice and it grows and that's it, right? There was a story behind it. So for me, that storytelling piece was really important as we move and look into culture. And everybody has culture, all right? So there's white culture, there's Black culture, there's Latin culture, and everywhere you go in the world, that culture is going to be different. And as you think of our students coming in, they might be a little bit different, right? They might see their culture in one way, and your culture might be in a different way. And as folks at HSIs or MSIs, MSIs have less data that are available for this specific topic. But if we look at HSIs enroll 67% of all Hispanic students or Latinx students. That is a massive amount of students that are coming into the classroom that may be a little bit different. Those institutions are continuing to grow, right? Even within this political climate, which we won't get into too much. But even within this political climate, right? Those numbers are shifting. And what is that? How does that look in your classroom? How does that impact your classroom? Well, as HSIs, I think this was some of your pre-reading, we want to look into what servingness looks like, right? So we're serving this really large population of Hispanic, Latinx, Latinx students, and we want to be able to look at how those students are succeeding and engaging through culturally enhancing equitable approaches that offer transformative experiences leading to both academic and non-academic outcomes, right? So if you look at Garcia's 2017 paper, and that has since evolved, she's expanded from this, and I think y'all are going to be learning about this. I think sometimes module 6 or 7, you'll be learning about this a little bit more, where what we look at within our student populations is, are we Latinx producing, right? We're maybe pumping out a lot of Latinx student graduates, but maybe they're not feeling like they love the place, right? They might not come back for your alumni associations. They might not come back to do specific work with your current student populations. Are we Latinx enrolling, right? Where we're not really looking at the student culture and our students aren't being super successful either. Or are we Latinx enhancing, where the culture is really great, but maybe our numbers and our outcomes aren't as high as they should be. They're not equitable. Our students aren't graduating at the same rates, but maybe they feel really, really loved and cared for at the institution. And our aim is to really be Latinx serving, right? Where one, we're producing high outcomes, equitable outcomes, where our students are graduating at equitable rates, and that our students are also being engaged culturally. And that goes for several of our students. And this actually the image on the right here is from your own work with the HSI Hub, where we really want to look at various components to determine whether we're actually being serving or not, right? Equitable outcomes, equitable experiences, and access, right? Bringing all those three components together to create servingness, right? We want to make sure that as our students are going through their academic processes, especially in STEM, that they're feeling like they're part of the culture. They're feeling like they're part of the STEM disciplines. Now, I said we were going to review how research supports that STEM culture disproportionately impacts Latinx student success and why systemic change is needed to increase the persistence and success of Latinx students in STEM. So let's get into that. What we do know is that diversity, right, is numbers. How many folks do you have enrolled? I believe I think I looked at the UNLV demographics, and it's about like 37% Latinx, about 14% Asian American, about 10% or less Black American, right? So you have numbers. You're diverse, right? You're an MSI, an HSI. Equity in outcomes is the success. Are students persisting? Are they learning? Are they growing? Are they continuing to access spaces? And we know that diversity does not equal equity, right? So what we want to look at is inclusion within that cultural system. So we want to have interculturally competent instructors. We are wanting to have all students expected to succeed, and we want to be in a culturally responsive learning environment. So how do we do that, right? Or what is the data show? We know that within this space, we have the numbers and we incorporate this cultural system, that the equity outcomes will increase, right? There'll be parity within those outcomes. So when we look at STEM specifically, we start at the K through 12 level, right? And you might be saying, I don't teach K through 12. No, but your students, guess where they're coming from? K through 12, right? So they're coming in from K through 12. And when we look at access to STEM disciplines, we can actually look at it as a funnel, right? K through 12, these students are like loving STEM. I have a nephew who is like the biggest nerd I've ever met, right? He's into robotics. He doesn't want to be an engineer. I don't know why. I'm like, he's robotics. He builds stuff. He built me like a little mini crossbow the last time I was home from like sticks and glue. The kid is cool, right? And we're fostering that, right? But many of our students don't get that. So now they're in a space where perhaps, they're at their K through 12, they're super interested. They're like, this is the coolest thing that I've ever seen. Look at this bridge, it's amazing. Or he's the same kid that asked for a rock tumbler when he was 4. And he didn't want like a play one. He wanted like a legit rock tumbler. Like he went and he looked for a professional rock tumbler and like saved all his money and like my sister's money. He really wanted a rock tumbler. He wanted to learn about rocks and stones and minerals. And I was like, okay, you're cool, right? But the first hurdle that our students have to face is getting into higher education, right? So then they go into higher education and the numbers get smaller. Then they select a program or a major and that number gets smaller. And then maybe they go into a specific department and that number gets smaller. And then they go into a course and the number gets smaller. And then they look for outside of the classroom interactions like internships, research programs, and that number gets smaller. Graduate school, that number gets smaller. So you see that we start with this large number of students, and at the end, we have a much smaller number. And all of this is because of access. So why do we need a cultural systems approach in order to successfully diversify STEM? Let's look at the research, right? So when we look at research by Crum, King, and Irizarry, does STEM stand out examining racial and ethnic gaps in persistence across post-secondary fields? They asked, are Black and Latina youth who begin in college and STEM majors more likely to depart than white students? They also asked, to what extent do racial and ethnic gaps in STEM persistent remain net of other factors? So if we remove all other factors, what's the net outcome, particularly in high school academic preparation? And do racial ethnic gaps in persistence to degree appear to be unique or more pronounced among STEM majors than in other fields? And if we look at the data, right, Latinx, Black, and white students enter at the same percentages in STEM fields, right? So these are our students, same percentages. These are STEM students coming in to STEM fields, very excited. They're stoked. They're going to go into that first, engineering class, engineering 101, or they're going to go into geology, or in my case, they're going to go into the bio class. But then this happens, right? These persistence, 57% of Latinx STEM majors switch out or leave the college without a degree. The gap between white and Latinx students' outcomes is the greatest in STEM, right? So I was actually having a conversation with Melissa during your breakout, and I'm not going to share what she said, but I really encourage you to talk to her because I don't know if you all know this, but she was a math major. So definitely have a conversation, get to know her a little bit, right? Ask her why she stayed. How did she get to the end of the finish line? So when we look at our students, our Black, our Latinx, and our white students tend to persist, right? They tend to stay. Whereas our Black and our Latinx students tend to leave the disciplines. They tend to move out of that space. Now, why is that? We're going to talk about that a little bit more, but I want you to take about 3 minutes for you to think about why you think students leave, right? So we're going to take about 3 minutes for silent reflection. Just write this down. You're not going to share this out with anybody, but list 3 challenges that you think Latinx or minoritized students in STEM face, and list 3 strategies that you think might help Latinx students succeed in STEM. Take about 3 minutes. I'll set a timer. All right. So hopefully you were able to identify a few things within this list. If you put more than 3, that's great. If you only could come up with 1, that's okay, because we're going to talk about it. So keep those in mind. Keep those on the side of your computer, your mind's eye, your phone, wherever it is that you wrote these down. So let's talk about this, right? So it's really important for us to explore why this is the case that students leave STEM. Why do students leave STEM at disproportionate levels, right? So we're thinking about what is happening with our students that they're leaving at a rate that is higher and inequitable compared to their white peers. Well, we talked very early on today about high context cultures and low context cultures, right? And how those influence how you show up in a space. Well, STEM culture is very low context. It's traditionally rewarding individualism versus collaboration. We're not talking about the lab space here, right? But we're talking about the lecture space. In a lecture space, we're talking about, oh, you got the right answer, you didn't get the right answer, you got the wrong answer, and information is processed in a very linear manner, right? Even things like the scientific method or the engineering design process, what do? We teach it in a linear manner. First, you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. Where in reality, that's not what actually happens, right? I know most of you are probably in labs or running your own research programs. How often, how many of you have had an experiment just by sign of emoji that went exactly as you planned? The first time. How about the second time? The 10th time? Adele's like, yeah, the 10th time worked, right? So you see that it's not it's an iterative process, right? It's not a linear process, yet we teach it in a linear manner. So our students, if they're high context students, they're coming from a high context environment or a high context culture. That's going to create what Laura Rendon and others, Alzadua also creates this choque or a cultural collision, right? Where a student from a very high context culture is coming into a space where there is a low context culture, a very Eurocentric culture, where they're going to feel almost displaced, right? They're going to be dislocated. They're not going to know what is kind of happening. Things like microaggressions, separation anxiety, college world challenges, right? Maybe they're the first time student, maybe they're the first in their family to go to college. They don't know what to expect, right? And so there's this hidden curriculum that we all have of, should I raise my hand in class? Should I not raise my hand in class? Should I say anything? What is happening that is going to help me navigate this? So we get into this cultural collision that our students then are, they're kind of in a space where they don't know where they belong and they don't know how to um, create congruency with that STEM culture and their own culture, right? So what we've seen through the data is that STEM education is a racialized experience for white, Latinx, and Black students, our Asian students as well. And STEM is the only field where Black and Latino youth are significantly more likely to switch. So we find evidence that white privilege and STEM degree attainment, we find evidence of white privilege and STEM degree attainment that is not mirrored in other major fields. Okay. Now, what about introductory courses in STEM? How many of you, by sign of emoji, or you can even type it in the chat, had a class where a faculty member said, look to your left, look to your right. Your person on one of you will not be here at the end of this class. Yeah, me, right? Yeah, I was one of those folks, right? Or you heard something similar, right? Now let's see what's in the chat here. Or yeah, so Michael, yeah, Donald said the 5th time his experiment worked. You have these experiences where now you're being told you're not going to make it, right? Now imagine that as a first-time college goer, first in your family to go to college, and somebody tells you that on the first day of class. Are you going to feel really welcome in that space? Probably not, right? So out of 110,000 student records at 6 large public research intensive institutions, they controlled for high school preparation and looked more intently at the impact of the weed out culture of grading, right? What do we usually say? These are gateway courses. These are entry-level courses. These are the courses that if you don't pass, you're not getting into the major. You're not going into the next step. What we saw, right, or what Hatfield saw, and this is a PNAS paper, is that In an equitable education system, students with comparable high school preparation intent to study STEM and who got a C or better in all their introductory STEM courses ought to have the same probabilities of attaining the degree. However, that's not what they saw. White male students have the highest probability of obtaining a STEM degree, while female underrepresented minority students are the least probable STEM graduates at 35.3%. And if we zoom in more closely, we see that Black female students only have a probability of 28.2% of graduating in STEM degrees. Now, as data-driven individuals, right, we're all science folks in this room, we're all data people. Does that data make sense to you? It shouldn't, right? But what we've seen is that we need to change the culture of STEM. Over the last 40 years, STEM has been doing the same things over and over and over and over again, right? In spite for calls over the last few decades to increase recruitment and retention of more women, students of color, and women of color in STEM, few efforts have focused on actually addressing the institution, addressing the faculty, addressing the staff, addressing the issue at hand, right? The intervention efforts have been implemented primarily focusing on a deficit model of fixing the students, right? We have supplemental instruction, we have tutoring, we have bridge programs like the one that I was in, we have summer intensive programs, we have, and not that these programs are wrong or bad. I have greatly benefited from those programs, but we're not getting to the root of the issue, right? We shouldn't need all of these programs for students to be successful. It should be something that we look at internally, right? So we're looking at this deficit model. And few have really focused on addressing those interpersonal factors, such as isolation and microaggressions within that culture of STEM that is rooted in a deficit model, and really don't change student perceptions of STEM as being a welcoming place for everybody to belong. So what this sends a message of to underrepresented or minoritized students is that they should acclimate to an unchanging STEM culture, and sacrifice part of their social cultural identities in order to fit in. Now, when we have that happen, it's really difficult, right? I'll speak from my own experience. Not going to every carne asada, okay, right? But not going to my niece's quinceañera, no way, right? And that was sort of the conversation, or a funeral of an aunt, right? That was a conversation I had to have with my PI in grad school and even in undergrad. Look, I know that for you, you're not close to your aunt, but my aunt raised me. So if I don't go to her funeral, this is not going to be good. I understand that my cells are going to die. I understand that I'm going to have to come back and work twice as hard and put in 120 hours next week. But this thing I have to go to, right? That's not congruent with what our students are doing. And frankly, I shouldn't have had to come back and do 120 hours the following week, right? So what this study showed is that we need to move beyond fixing those students, and have a critical reflection and examination of department, school, college, and university policies and cultures. So really examining what are we doing within our courses, what are we doing within our programs, what are we doing within our departments, what are we doing at the institutional level that is creating these incongruencies in culture with our students. So what we know, STEM students, more than other majors, have a racialized experience. Latinx and Black students are being pushed out by STEM that privileges white student or white culture. So let's take a moment to soak that in. This is a lot, right? So if you're having feelings, I'm having feelings. It's okay to have feelings. Or at least that's what my therapist says. All right, so let's do this. Well, we want to change this, right? We want to look at what this is, right? And one of the things that it tells us here is that we need to change the perception of what STEM is like and what STEM is and how we actually conduct ourselves in STEM. Right? So let's recognize how using disaggregated data and questioning are going to help us identify equity gaps, starting at the institutional level down to the course or instructor level. Okay, so you saw this before. UNLV, I think, has an 80% admission rate, right? So if you apply as a student, 80% of those students are allowed to join within the UNLV community. Then we have your programs, right? So engineering, we have geology, we have the life sciences. How impacted are those programs, right? Do students have to wait a very long time to get into an introductory course? Do students have to wait a really long time do they have to apply for the program, right? I know for us here in the county that I'm in, it's our dental hygiene program. It's a new baccalaureate program, and they only accept 20 students a year. And we have 300 students apply, right? So again, narrowing that funnel, right? Program or department or major, right? Whether it's engineering, geology, the life sciences, and then your courses, your major courses. I know for us in bio, where we're going into microbiology, it was that intro microbiology course, right? Because then we went into sub micro courses. And then outside of the classroom, how many of your students are participating in internships? How many are getting work study? Maybe they're lab assistants. Maybe they're washing dishes in the lab with your prep staff. How many of them are going on to graduate or professional education? So by the time they reach college, our Latinx and Latinx students have experienced years of invalidating messages in the educational system. And then this continues, right? So Canning et al. And Rendon both talk about this, right? So K through 12 students have fewer AP courses. They have more teacher turnover. They're in underfunded schools. And many have internalized now 12 years of low expectations and microaggressions from teachers and academic counselors. So what are we doing with our academic advising, right? So, and I've certainly had this experience with some of my students coming and telling me that they've heard this from folks, whether it's at this institution or previous institutions that I've been at. Where they come in and they talk to a counselor, they talk to an academic advisor or their faculty, and they say, I want to be a doctor. And the response isn't, oh my gosh, that's like the coolest thing ever. How can I help you get there? That's a really big goal. Like, do you want to pick something a little bit easier? So what is the student here, right? The student here's, I'm not sure I have the capacity to learn this now. The instructor doesn't care if I learn or not. If they don't think I can be a doctor, then why am I in this class? They're going to be afraid to ask for help. They're not sure they deserve the help, right? So are we enforcing or dismantling these negative narratives, right? So let's look at your data and equity indices. So I think all of you were provided some information, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Rincon. I think some folks were trying to get some data from their areas.
Yes, everyone was instructed as part of the pre-learning to bring some data with them to today's module, either classroom level data, departmental level data, or institutional level data.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to dig right in. And the first part of all of this, right, is asking a question. What is your target group? What is your reference population? And what is your unit for analysis? So what we're going to do, and actually we're going to do this a little bit longer than 10 minutes. We're going to do, since the groups are a little bit bigger, we're going to do 15 minutes. Oops. So what I'm going to ask you all to do, right, is with your data that you brought with you, we're going to send you off into your breakouts again. And this time, we're going to start in reverse alphabetical order. So we're going to start with the person that whose last name is at the top, at the end of the alphabet, is going to be our timekeeper. And what we're going to ask our timekeeper to do is to just keep us moving forward and ensuring that everybody has an opportunity to share out. So I believe you're all still, so we're going to keep you in your disciplines, and we're doing this for a reason. So, one, you all should be within a related program, or at least a program that intersects, right? So we know that, again, for me, for the sake of example, right? I know that physics in my division is very closely interlaced with math and with engineering. Whatever physics is doing, we got to make sure the math is doing and that engineering is doing, and vice versa. We want to make sure that all those programs are aligned. So, what we're going to do is ask you to do the following. So, you're going to take maybe a little bit longer than 15 minutes. We'll kind of feel it out. And in your group, you're going to work together to discuss, maybe take about 5 minutes for each of these. We'll give you a little bit more than 15 minutes. What is your target group for your data? Who's going to be your reference population? And what are you analyzing, right? So we want to make sure we're going to look at equity indices and try to determine how students are doing in your classroom, right? You can pick Latinx students, you can pick your Black students, you can pick your Indigenous population, but we want you to identify as a group who your target population is going to be so that you can start looking at your data in a more concerted manner. And we're also going to ask what the reference population is. I usually tend to use the reference population as the entire population in the program, right? Or the entire population in the institution. And then we're going to ask you to kind of discuss, right? Some of you might have gotten course level data, some of you might have gotten program level data, and some of you might have gotten institutional data. Discuss amongst yourselves what you want to that data that you're going to analyze to be, right? Is it going to be your institutional data? Is it going to be your program level data? Course instructor level data, I would hold off on that one just because it's a little personal. I don't know if you want to share that with your colleagues, but let's take about 15 minutes to have a robust discussion in a breakout room of what you want to look at. You can also discuss what you think maybe some challenges that students are facing within your programs that you're already starting to identify just from our conversation today. So, Melissa, if you could put the breakouts out, then we'll move forward from there. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you got some time to discuss at minimum what data you brought with you. We're gonna keep moving forward, and I'm gonna call on a couple people just to hear what you all did in your group. So I'm gonna call on Michael. Could you share a little bit about what you did in your group?
I think that's me. Well,
Yeah.
we had some problems with the obtaining the numbers from the department. Apparently, it's apparently not so easy. But it was interesting to see. At least one of our colleagues, she calculated some numbers for like a higher grade class, but there were only like 13 people in that class, so I'm not sure how representative that is for geology in total. But I think it's a good exercise that maybe it's worth doing for all our classes on a regular basis, and then just compare these numbers over time.
So thank you for sharing. All right, what about Adele? Oh, look, you knew it was going to be you.
I didn't die. So we did a couple things. We talked about we got data for life sciences, which was really interesting, and then we also talked about uh, the Las Vegas population, that graduates, incoming students, and what is being reflected in that way. Kind of going back to where in the beginning when you talked about equity. I can't talk today. It is Friday. Equity in like the retention rates, the graduation rates, and it's not like it's clearly not. So yeah, we talked about it on sort of everything from citywide to department wide.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So we're going to keep moving forward, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what you're going to learn moving forward in the program that is going to help you sort of address some of these equity gaps. But in the meantime, we'll we'll talk a little bit more about how this data might help you and how using this data, accessing this data, you saw that it is not always easy to come by this data, but it is important data to have, right? So I think this is where we were. Thank you for sharing out what you all did in your groups, because that helps sort of form the rest of our conversation. And so key questions, right, for you to ask yourselves as you're moving forward is, who is accessing your program? This is something Adele and I practiced this earlier today, and they set me right up for this slide. I'm kidding. I've never met Adele. Which population are you interested in learning about? And do your programs reflect your surrounding community? Who do you aim to serve in your program, and who is your reference population? So these are all questions that were in the pre-reading that you all had, right? So this is already something that you should be thinking about ahead of time. Now, you have some information. I adapted a little bit, a uh, form that was shared with me, and I want you all to kind of take a look, and you can use this. It's a live document. So I'm going to put this in the chat. It's a Google Doc for you to start taking a look at and really start diving into what this might mean. Now, at the very beginning, right, you're all looking, your first step is to look at the data, right? So if we look at the first part is, what is your target group? What is your reference population? And what is your unit of analysis? And I apologize for my punctuation here. What you have, who is missing from the data, how can you get that data, so on and so forth, right? So feel free to use this. It's going to be open for you all as long as you want it. Feel free to make a copy of it for yourself, and keep it in your own, whether it's your Google Drive or a OneDrive or whatever it is that you use as you move forward with your cohort. And I know that both Aisha and Blanca and Melissa are going to be providing you with additional handouts that are going to help you in this process. So really looking at access is kind of honing in on who is part of your program, right? Start looking at what might be who might be the folks that are within that space, and assessing that data, right? You want to know where those equitable outcomes are and those equitable experiences are. What are those things? So what data do you have? What data do you need? What or who is missing from the data? How can you access that data, right? Some of you brought that up, of not having access to the data. So who can you have this conversation with? Is it your institutional effectiveness folks? What I don't recommend you doing is guessing what your students' ethnic or racial backgrounds are. You don't know, don't do it. Or skip the next breakout. But the next step that you want to focus on are outcomes, right? So looking at year-to-year retention in the major versus retention at the institution. Often when we think about retention data, we think of whether the students stayed at the institution. We don't look at STEM programs to see, hey, are students leaving in droves after Bio 101? Are they leaving in droves after your second level geology course? Or in our case, one of our courses where students tend to drop quite a bit is dynamics in engineering, right? What is happening within those classrooms that is creating that? Other things you may want to look at is honors course demographics. So who are the students in your honors courses? Who's in your honor program? What's going on with your gateway courses, and analyzing those DFW and I rates. So drop, fail, withdrawal, or incomplete grades. This is something that we often forget when we're looking at our data, and this would be at the instructor level. As faculty, we get really like touchy, right? We're not going to let other people look at our own data of what's going on in our classrooms, but this is something for you to do with your own data of your own students in your own classrooms, to say, are the majority of my Latinx students passing, but maybe they're passing with a C or a D, right? D is not really passing, but depends on the program. Are they failing? Am I failing a disproportionate number of Latinx students or Black students or Asian students in comparison to which group, right? For you to start taking a look at there. And then for your experiences, things like faculty office hours. Are your faculty office hours only in your office where it's scary and it's your domain and you're sitting behind a desk and a student has never been there? Or are you doing something perhaps in the multicultural center, right? How many of you are doing office hours there? Faculty engagement in clubs, really important. This is one of the key measures where we see students are retained is because they're interacting with faculty. And then faculty and staff demographics and or experiences that reflect the student population. One of the things that we see, especially in the sciences, is that there is very disproportionate representation of students and faculty. Research experiences, work study in the labs, as I mentioned before, course undergraduate research experiences, right? So are there only 2 to 3 students in your program that get to experience research, or are there 300 students in your program that get to experience research at some level? So those are the kinds of things that you might want to start to look at. And what influences those or how those students are interacting with those may be informed by how they interact culturally with you and within your program. So if you've not read the paper that is listed here, this is Rendon, Científicos Latinexes, and it talks, I know Blanca mentioned that in a later stage, you're going to be talking about cultural community wealth. That's going to be really important for you to think about. This specific paper, Científicos Latinexes by Laura Rendon from UTSA, speaks about Latinx culture and STEM culture and what helps students be successful. What we see in STEM specifically is that, and I apologize that I left off the citation here, but I'll put it in there before I send this to you all, is that faculty tend to avoid conversations of race in their classroom, specifically in STEM. And that then creates a sense of isolation, being the spokesperson, being stereotyped, or being unfairly graded in the student's perspective. So when we think about students and we think about what they're doing, when we look at faculty within the STEM disciplines, faculty tend to evade any conversation about race within the classroom. So in a study, and I'll put it up here in a second because I do have it up, where they measured racialized events within the STEM classroom, most faculty noticed the event, but did not acknowledge that the event happened, right? So this then creates tension within the classroom. This creates a sense that the student, that you might not care about the student, right? If a microaggression or macroaggression happened and you say nothing, right? So as you go through the program, you're going to be able to learn kind of how your own biases, the biases of your students, how your own culture sort of plays into this. And importantly, what we see, yeah, so absolutely. Thank you, Blanca. That's a great question. So a racialized event. So for example, I hate giving these examples because they're so cringy. But for example, I could say, hey, Paloma, um, I noticed that Jenny hasn't been coming to class. Can you, Jenny's another Latina. Can you tell me why she's not here? I don't know, Jenny. I've never met Jenny. Jenny's one of 300 people in the class. How would I know? Right? So now I'm thinking, is the professor asking me because they think I'm Jenny's friend? Are they asking me because I'm also a Latinx person? Do they think all Latinx people know each other? I've never even interacted with this person. I'm actually not even sure who Jenny is. What does Jenny look like? Is she tall? Is she short? Dark hair, right? Or that's kind of being the spokesperson. Or something that I've definitely heard is, well, girls, especially Latinas, they don't do well in math, right? Now you're stereotyping an entire population to say, right? And these are comments that faculty make on a regular basis, whether we like to admit it or not. I've certainly heard it from my faculty and had to have a little chit chat with them of like, what did you say and why? Right? So creating those stereotypes or racialized events. So what happens in the classroom when somebody says that, whether it's a faculty member or another student? Hey, George, you know, you look kind of tall. Did you play basketball? From one student to another. Maybe one of the students is African American, maybe they're not, right? But as a faculty member, how do you address that? How do you say, what did you mean by that? Why'd you ask George? Right? So having those conversations and acknowledging that those happen so that students can then feel comfortable returning to the classroom and understand that you have their back, right? You have their best interest at heart, and that you're not going to let other perceptions and other perspectives sort of influence how the class is moving forward, right? Something else that comes up when we think about racialized experiences for students in the classroom is the disparity between student demographics and faculty instructor demographics, specifically within HSIs, right? So majority of our students are Latinx, but the majority of our faculty are white, right? And that doesn't mean that you can't teach Latinx students, is that now you have to look at your own cultural context, as we talked about at the beginning, to see how your culture is influencing how your student is learning, and how your student's culture is influencing also how they're learning and participating in the classroom. So what are some things that make the difference, right? So this is again from Científicos Latinxes, and Rendon lists a number of things in there that help students be successful, and one of these being validation, right? So my mentor, Dr. Da, also helped to reassure me that the right decision of going to do UGA for the summer when he told me, you have what it takes to be a scientist. It was the moment that I had no doubt that I'd be getting my PhD. That was, for me, Nick Lanuti, right? He was like, go, you have the ability to do research. I had never heard about research. The first thing I asked him when he asked me if I wanted to do research was, do I get paid? Because I need to pay tuition. And he said, yeah. And I was like, sweet, that's great. I like to get paid, right? My second inspiration has been my advisor, counselor, and academic guidance counselor, Heidi Taboada. She is the reason I'm almost done with my PhD today. She's always encouraged her students to learn about new things and challenge themselves, right? So that validation is really important, because when we think about, this is from Toni Morrison, Playing in the Dark, um, when you're a fish in an environment, right? Everything about the fish, their environment, and the water in which they swim is created and framed by the bowl that contains them. In this case, it's the STEM bowl, right? The STEM culture. And that bowl is the construction or fabrication of the writer, of the person, of the student. And specifically, right, when we think about whiteness, whiteness doesn't come from individual racism. It's a system. Whiteness is a cultural belief system that's deficit or implied, where white people's achievements, norms, and cultural value systems are focused and centered and seemed as the correct piece, right? Whiteness is hard for all of us to really kind of take a look at, because we've all grown up and been enculturated in whiteness as students and educators in the US, which are predominantly white. So when we think about whiteness and STEM narratives and cultures, right? Some students just can't hack it. This is something I've definitely heard. Some students don't have the background. Some students' families just don't support their education. These are all things you've probably heard. Maybe you've even said them yourself, right? These weeding out narratives create a culture that supports whiteness and prevents that inclusion of those students. Latinx are already underrepresented. They're already experiencing microaggressions. They suffer from stereotype threat, which is sort of that not all girls are bad at math kind of thing. Weeding out narratives really don't have any place within our work, right? And for us to diversify STEM and strengthen the STEM workforce, we really need to use our muscles for disruption, right? We need to disrupt those weed out systems. We need to ask our Latinx switchers and leavers. So those students that leave your program, why are they leaving? Ask them, do exit interviews. and disaggregate all STEM entering persistent graduation rate by race, ethnicity, and gender, and then share it with your colleagues. This is something that's going to be important for you to do. And as you do that, moving forward with your work, right, and looking at some of the work for the Center for Urban Education, is that you can actually identify whether you are close to experiencing equity, right? So a score of 1.0 means that you're experiencing equity, and anything less than a 1.0 is you're not experiencing equity, right? You'll be able to use some of the data that you have to actually go through and say, is this equitable? Am I reaching equitable outcomes, access, etc., as you move forward? So what if the data doesn't tell you what you need, right? So sometimes we look at our data and we have a large number of Latinx students, and so therefore a large number of Latinx students are going to be graduating. Okay, what about your subpopulations, your male or female or non-binary students? Can you disaggregate by race and gender? Low income or Pell eligible students, first gen students, students with intersecting identities like Black Latinx, Asian Latinx, non-binary Latinx, or male Latinx, so that you actually are looking for what is happening in my class, what is happening in my program. So what comes next, right? Then I'm going to turn it over to Aisha to closes out. But what comes next is learning more about how your students' culture influences how they learn, how your own culture impacts in-class interactions, remodeling that STEM culture and creating a sense of belonging for students. So looking at those different things that are happening within your program, what's happening within your first year courses? Why are your students leaving? Really digging into that assessment and how your own cultural background influences the classroom, identifying your own culture and your biases, right? And then how to address the gaps. So I'm going to finish on time, and I'm going to send it over to Aisha. We could keep going forever on this topic, but I want to be respectful of y'all's time.
Well, first, I hope you will all join me reacting, commenting, just to thank Dr. Vargas for this very engaging, informative, visually beautiful presentation. And before I wrap up, are there any questions? Does anybody have any concluding thoughts or questions for Dr. Vargas?
So I actually have a question, and maybe this is something we're going to cover later or not, but a couple of things you said just sort of like triggered memories of students. So you said something like if your grandma was talking, you were going to stay with your grandmother and not go to class. And then you also said, you know, you had your niece's quinceanera, like, and I understand that, and I want to be respectful of that, but on the flip side, like, how do we balance expectations and cultural sensitivity? For example, I had a student once who missed an exam. He didn't tell me, he just didn't come. And he showed up a week later. He's like, I'm ready to take my exam. And I'm like, you missed it. It's just a 0. And he's like, but I had to pick my mom up from the airport. Like, I had to do that. And he was first gen. He like the family didn't understand. Like he had family obligations over class obligations. And he was a pre-nursing student. The nursing school would never accept that. Nursing would never accept that. So like, how do I, again, balance that expectations of what is expected of them, but also be sensitive to their culture?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question, right? And a big part of this, right, of creating equity is not changing your expectations of your students, but clearly communicating what those expectations are. We want to have high expectations for all of our students, our Latinx students, our Black students, our white students. We want them all to achieve at a high level, right? One of the conversations that we have regularly in my area is rigor, right? Rigor doesn't mean weeding out. Rigor means, do you understand the material, right? So when we think about expectations, one of the things that I do and that I encourage all my faculty to do is put it in your syllabus. Put what your expectation is, because this is part of the hidden curriculum, right? The student didn't know that they had to tell you that they were going to pick up their mom or their grandma or whoever it was from the airport, and that maybe they were the only one that drives, or maybe they were the only one that felt safe to drive in this political environment. So putting that expectation on there, one of the things that I know you're going to do a syllabus review at some point, but one of the things that I add to my syllabus is communicate with me. If you are not here, right? And I put it on myself. If you are not here, I am going to worry about what happened to you. I want to know if you are okay. If there is a life event that is happening, tell me ahead of time so that you and I can have a conversation versus after. And I make that very clear with my students, right? I need you to be successful. I want you to have this conversation with me, and my door is open for you to come and ask. But if you don't lay out that, especially for our first gen students across racial and ethnic backgrounds, they don't know what they don't know, right? So they don't know that they need to tell you that they're going to miss the exam. Maybe it's their first semester, maybe it's their third semester, but they don't know that from you. So having those very clear expectations and clear communication, things that you may think they should know this, they don't, right? How would they know it? The first time you probably used an app, you had no idea how to use it. You had to go Google it, right? How do I use this app? What do I do? Let me look at the FAQs. Put in an FAQ in your Canvas page or your learning environment, your LMS. Hey, this is an FAQ. You have a random question? Pop it in here, right? It's anonymous, or it can be part of the discussion post, whatever it is, but communicate those expectations, because that helps them, one, understand what the curriculum is, right? Two, it helps them communicate with you, and now you're not like, well, what the heck? This student didn't even show up. They probably don't even care. They probably do care, and they care a lot. They just had no idea that they had to tell you, right? So doing some of that ahead of time, right? And I even tell my students, hey, just how you would tell your boss that you're not coming to work, tell me. It's not going to bother me. If you send me an email, it's totally cool. I know I get 100 emails a day, but I'll get to it, and then I'll know, like, oh, Steven didn't show up today because Steven stubbed his toe on the bed and like his nail is bleeding, whatever, right? But creating those expectations and verbalizing them, putting them in writing, right? And not in a punitive manner, but I'm here for your success. And the way that I'm going to help you be successful is by you telling me what's going on. I hope that helps.
Yeah,
Thank you. I'm going to do my 30-second wrap up. Again, we thank you, Dr. Vargas, for this amazing presentation that has given us a lot to think about. So for everyone except Julie, you will be coming back for Module 4 on June 20th. And in this off week for next week, we hope that you really will continue to look at data, to think about your target populations, to start to ask the questions, how are students experiencing my courses, our program, our department, UNLV, because this will be an ongoing conversation. In addition to that, we have reflection questions for Module 2 that you can find in Module 2 in Canvas. So please do take some time and respond to our reflection questions for this module. And then for Julie, we'll see you next week, and we'll continue to talk about developing a faculty professional development series. If there are any questions, I can stay on for a little bit longer, but thank you all for your attention and your attendance today.